Tafeni English, Director of the Civil Rights Memorial Center. The Civil Rights Memorial Center is a project of Southern Poverty Law Center and home to the Civil Rights Memorial. Here at the Civil Rights Memorial Center, we honor and pay tribute to those who lost their lives during the modern civil rights movement. The modern day civil rights movement is marked by the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education and ends with the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968. But we know that the civil rights movement did not end with the assassination of Dr. King. These individuals, the 40 individuals who lost their lives during the struggle for equality and justice, there are names who have never made the history books, but their courageous act helped to galvanize a movement that brings us to where we are today. We realize here at the Civil Rights Memorial Center that we have a very long way to go. This space serves as a space of education and reflection of those who lost their lives and those of us who are still here to continue the struggle for equality and justice. Now, my colleague, David Hodge, the educational coordinator for the Civil Rights Memorial Center, will take you on an educational journey so that you will be able to learn more about the heroes that we honor and pay tribute to here daily.
The Civil Rights Memorial Center is an educational space that we use to educate children here in the state of Alabama. 70% of the fourth graders here in the state of Alabama come through this stop as a part of the Alabama history curriculum. We teach about the 40 martyrs who were killed during the civil rights movement and the system of domestic terrorism used to enforce segregation. There are some notable folks that we honor, like Emmett Till, Medgar Evers, the 4 girls from the 16th Street bombing, the 3 men from the Mississippi burning case, Viola Liuzzo, and Martin Luther King. We're also here to elevate the stories of folks who did not make it into history books. Reverend George Lee, Lamar Smith, Herbert Lee, and Lewis Allen are just a few examples of folks who lost their lives in the state of Mississippi combating voter suppression. There was a lot of bloodshed over the right to vote, and voter suppression has evolved over the years. Reverend George Lee lost his life after managing to register to vote in the state of Mississippi. He was allowed to register under the auspice that as long as he didn't try to register other Black people, it would be fine. He managed to register about 92 other Black people to vote before being killed in retaliation for his voter registration efforts. Reverend George Lee was shot in the face while driving his car by people who were driving in the opposite direction. The car wrecked, and just to give you a sense of the level of corruption in local cities at the time, the coroner blamed his cause of death on the accident that ensued after he was shot, as opposed to the bullet fragments in his face. So nobody was ever held responsible in criminal court for killing Reverend George Lee. Lamar Smith was registering people to vote in Lincoln County, Mississippi, and when people got wind of it, they confronted him in front of a courthouse. He was shot in broad daylight in front of a crowd of dozens of people, and nobody would testify about who did it. So nobody was ever held responsible in criminal court for killing him. Today, activists, organizers, political entities are still working to combat the efforts of voter suppression. There were many folks who lost their lives in the civil rights movement who were veterans. Corporal Roman Duxworth is one example of somebody who lost his life on the way home to visit his family. His wife was having their baby, and he had arrived in town in Taylorsville, Mississippi, after traveling from Fort Ritchie, where he was stationed. When he arrived in town, he was asleep on the bus, and the local sheriff boarded the bus, assumed that he was a freedom rider, and attacked him. That local sheriff slapped him to wake him up. They had a brief physical altercation, and then Corporal Roman Duxworth was subsequently shot. The sheriff later discovered that he knew Corporal Roman Duxworth's father, who was a notable farmer, owned about 40 acres of land, and was well known in the community. The sheriff went to Corporal Roman Duxworth's father and apologized and said, "If I had known that was your son, I wouldn't have shot him." To which the father replied, "It doesn't matter whose son it was, it matters that you took a life for no reason." Corporal Roman Duxworth is a prime example of the historical context of police brutality. Oftentimes, in Black communities, we have to talk to our children to prepare them for respectful and safe interactions with the police. And when we look at incidents like what happened in Los Angeles with the Rodney King verdict, after Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson, and after Freddie Gray was killed in Baltimore, there's been outrage. And that outrage stems from the fact that communities of color, Black communities, have always had to contend with these things. And we continue to contend with a justice system that doesn't work fairly when these incidents happen. The city of Birmingham had a violent reputation. Its nickname was Birmingham because of the over 40 bombings in which nobody was arrested, charged, or indicted. These 4 girls were killed in the 16th Street Baptist Church in a bombing early one Sunday morning. The Ku Klux Klan targeted the 16th Street Baptist Church because it was a hub of civil rights activity. There were trainings for the children's marches held there, and there were marches that actually left from this church. On the day that these 4 girls were killed, this young man, Virgil Ware, was riding on the handlebars of his brother's bike. He was an innocent bystander who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was shot twice by 2 16-year-olds who had attended a Klan rally earlier that day. Those 2 young men were eventually arrested and charged and convicted and given probation. Birmingham was marred by violence that day, and these are just 5 of the 6 people killed that day in Birmingham. The system of domestic terrorism used to enforce segregation cost many folks their lives. Some were activists, participants in the movement, and some were innocent bystanders, such as these children. We here at the Civil Rights Memorial Center honor these folks by telling their stories and elevating the causes for which they died. Our hope is that you will take the time to read more about their lives and about their sacrifices, and read more about the connection between the issues that they fought against and the issues of social justice and human rights that are going on today. Thank you.
Despite the tremendous gains of the civil rights movement, hate and discrimination are deeply entrenched in our society today. As you've heard my colleague David Hodge talk about the violence that many of the people during the modern civil rights movement were met with, we still see that today. And we also are inspired here by the civil rights movement to continue the work that we're continuing today. In this hallway, we honor and elevate those who recently lost their lives at the hands of those motivated by hate. In this space, we tell their stories, we uplift their names, and we hope that you too will be inspired to take a stand against injustice and fight for equality. On June 17, 2015, Dylan Roof, a white supremacist, walked into a church and joined parishioners who were gathered for a Bible study. He sat among them, and shortly after, he would take out a gun and proceed to murder 9 individuals at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church. The murders of these 9 individuals resonated throughout the communities, and it was also a resemblance of what we saw happening during the modern civil rights movement, where oftentimes houses of worship were targeted by white supremacists who were threatening and intimidating and insistent on starting a race war. The lives of the Emmanuel 9 will be remembered in our hearts and in society forever.
In recent years, there's been a rise in xenophobia here in the U.S. Globally, white nationalists and white supremacists speak about a racial anxiety that's motivated by the idea of migrant displacement. Khalid Jabbar and his mother Haifa were both attacked by their neighbor, Vernon Majors. Vernon Majors was a very racist alcoholic who would harass Khalid and his mother on a fairly regular basis. Khalid's mother Haifa was run over about 11 months before Khalid was killed by Vernon Majors. Khalid was shot to death after having filed restraining orders against Vernon Majors, after having called the police on a regular basis. Vernon Majors was convicted and sentenced to life and died 7 months into that life sentence. In spite of the fact that Vernon Majors had restraining orders against him, in spite of the fact that Vernon Majors had a history of violence and was on bond for running over Khalid's mother, he was able to get a gun. And that speaks to the availability of guns in the U.S. Elon Nettles was on the way home with a friend when she was approached by a man by the last name Dixon. He was with his friends. He asked her what her name was and where she was from, as if he were interested in her romantically. And when his friends discovered that she was trans, he got embarrassed, so he hit her. And she hit the ground, and then he kept hitting her. And with every blow, her head was hitting the ground. She slipped into a coma and died about 5 days later. The young man who beat her to death with his bare hands was arrested, charged with manslaughter. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 12 years. Elon Nettles is an example of the violence against Black trans women. In recent years, the national media has started to cover this violence against trans women more. There are several factors that factor into the fact that trans women of color are more susceptible to this type of violence. They face job discrimination at a higher rate. They're more likely to be homeless, and they're more likely to be subject to poverty. They also die disproportionately due to gun violence. Shamim Murad was a member of the Yazidi religion. Yazidis are a monotheistic people who find themselves frequently in conflict with ISIS. ISIS's goal, as we know, is to create an Islamic state with a very radical interpretation of Islam. Part of that effort means that they use forced conversion as a means of making people become a part of their Islamic state. Shamim Murad was given the chance to convert to Islam, and when she refused, she was shot to death and buried in a mass grave with about 80 other women. Her daughter Nadia was taken and victimized in the way that ISIS takes and victimizes young women from the Yazidi community. Nadia was victimized for about 3 months. She was sold into sex slavery, and then she broke free and became an activist. And Nadia Murad recently won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2018 for her activism. Our goal here at the Civil Rights Memorial Center is to inspire people to collective action. We're very aware that the civil rights movement inspired the activism that goes on today, and we believe that to be neutral when there are injustices going on in the world is dangerous. That is why there's a quote from Elie Wiesel directly behind me. It is about the danger of neutrality. It always helps the oppressor and never the victim. The march continues.